Thank you all for coming. This beautiful day. The stories of the being were very interesting to me and very relevant for me personally. The stories that we read for Boches. 30 years ago, I was a doctoral student at the Hebrew University, living in Rehov Mapo. Haven't been back so many years. Being here now after 30 years is a similar kind of experience. Not yet 84, and made some differences, but it's significant for me. And today I want to talk about the ritual and sincere selves, perhaps somewhat obliquely, basically through the lenses of what I would call ritual and sincerity. Okay? I think maybe it's only appropriate to begin a session on ritual and secular sincere selves by invoking the words of a 10th century Islamic mystic, Al-Khalaj, right, who famously declared, as everybody knows, I'm al-Haq, I'm the law. Meaning, in essence, I am the deity. As you would imagine, neither Khalif nor the jury consultants were too pleased with this, and Khalaj was condemned to death and excommunicated. His sentence was particularly gruesome. He was condemned to 1,000 lashes, followed by the cutting off of his hands and feet, and then decapitation. Some 3 centuries later, the great Sufi thinker Rumi explained Khalaj's dictum, pointing out that Khalaj did not mean to equate himself with God at all, just the opposite. In essence, Rumi exclaimed that since God was everything and man nothing, Khalaj was no more than one manifestation of the Almighty. It was not self-aggrandizement that was at the heart of Khalaj's claim, but in fact the nullification of the self. Am I speaking at the proper cadence, not too quickly, clear? So, while I'm still very confused about what a self is, I'm even unsure that there is such a thing, but maybe we can talk about that later. Before we can even get to any possible predicates of the self, ritual, sincere, secular, religious, or otherwise, I do find the Khalaj dictum very useful. It illuminates for me one central characteristic of this still unknown entity, the self. And that characteristic is its relational nature. Whatever else the self may or may not be, I take it more or less for granted that it exists in relation. If nothing else, this is what we learn from Winnicott and other object relation theorists in psychoanalytic theory, right? Only when ego can distinguish itself from mother and from the world can the self come to exist, always already in relation with an alter. We recall the critical role of the transitional object in effecting this primary separation, which then allows the development of relationships, and through relationships, ego autonomy. Through relationships, ego autonomy. So there's something maybe slightly at first thought counterintuitive, right? Autonomy only exists in relationship. Without relationship, there's no autonomy. There's just one. Baby and mother is one. An interesting parallel to this can be found in Eric Voegelin's discussion of the role of transcendence in the emergent forms of human consciousness. The philosopher Voegelin tells us, and I quote, finds himself in a new relation with God. He not only discovers his own psyche as the instrument for experiencing transcendence, but at the same time discovers the divinity in its radically non-human transcendence. What emerges, he goes on to explain, and again, I quote, is a new idea of man who has found his true nature through finding his true relation to God. The truth of man and the truth of God are inseparably one. Phylogenesis and ontogenesis philosophy and psychology seem to coincide. Selves emerge only in relation. Just how that relation is managed, if it is managed, however, it's a whole different matter. In this context, Durkheim's work on suicide is of great relevance. You know, when I teach sociology, I say the first text of sociology of any significance is Durkheim's work on suicide. Why? Why is it so important, Durkheim's work on suicide, for all of the social sciences, not just for sociology? Anybody have any idea? Why is it so important? Anybody ever study, like, you know, Sociology 101? Ever read Durkheim's work on suicide? Somebody must have. So why is it so important? What's he find? What's Durkheim find in suicide? Forget the nature of his regression analysis and statistical problems and so on. What does he do, right?
That the most intimate and important personal decision of a person is dependent upon society.
Right, exactly. In other words, he finds that if indeed it was only an individual, intimate, personal act, the distribution in society would be random. Randomly, but, as he shows, Protestants kill themselves more than Catholic, Jews kill themselves less than Protestants, people in the city kill themselves more than people in the country. In other words, it has a social reality. It has a relational reality. That's what social reality means. Voilà. So even this most intimate of things is in some aspect eminently social. To return to Khalaj's mysticism, I admit that it seems to negate, seems to negate the relational aspects of the self by collapsing it into God. And I think this is a potential that is there in all mysticism, Khalaj perhaps being the most extreme, but aspects are also to be found in Saint Teresa of Avila and many others. Now, the Caliph, of course, was not particularly concerned with the collapse and loss of self, but rather in the implied collapse and loss of transcendent authority, of which he was, of course, the earthly representative. Yet, and to me this is the great giveaway, when the relational aspect is brought into question, when the relational aspect of the self is brought into question, both poles, that of the self and that of the other, are threatened with collapse. The self, however, can be lost or collapsed in another direction as well. It can collapse not only into the transcendent, but also into the immanent. It can collapse into the social. I think a careful review of the epistemological assumptions of the social sciences will in fact reveal that this is precisely what has occurred in our ways of thinking about selves. We have collapsed selves, we social scientists, have collapsed selves into status groups, or into roles, into biological drives, or alternatively, into psychologically or socially mandated needs. In doing so, however, we have lost an ability to account for the will, let alone for the idea of free will, in our reckoning of the self and of its acts. And of course, the acts of the self are the only thing we can access. We cannot access the self in itself, only in its consequences. Some of you may recall that half a century ago, Ralph Dahrendorf warned us of this in his probably no longer taught article, Homo Sociologicus. Is that still taught yet? Anyway, no, great article. But 50 years or so before Dahrendorf, Durkheim had already told us that we had a choice between God or society as sources of moral authority, and so of relationally constituted selves. Though, of course, God and society with totally different relational predicates. I dare say that the collapse of the self into transcendence threatens our very perception of that realm, as we can see from many forms of contemporary religious practice among Jews, Christians, and others. So too, the collapse of the self into society threatens our perception of the latter. And if I understand aright, this was something that in different ways troubled thinkers like Hannah Arendt and David Reisman, not a little, all of whom saw the evolution of society into a mass precisely through the collapse of that relational nature. And Hannah Pitkin, in fact, writing about Arendt, called this perception of society a blob. Let me return to Durkheim for a bit, because in a much less prophetic voice, Durkheim spent much time studying just that mechanism that I would claim preserves the relational aspect of the self. A mechanism that preserves the relational aspect of the self, and by this I'm referring to ritual. By ritual, I understand, following Rappaport, a series of formal, iterated acts or performances. Maybe I should write that on the board. Formal, iterated is just a fancy word for repeated. Okay? Formal, iterated acts or performances. There are other bits to the definition I won't go into now. If you think about it for a minute, if an act is to be repeated, it has to have a formal quality to it, right? Right? You can't repeat something if there was no formal property to it. So those go together. Right? So it's performance, it's something done, it's formal, and it's repeated. So these formal iterated acts and performances, to continue with Rappaport, are not entirely encoded by the performer, which means that they are imbued with meanings external to the performer. I had a graduate student who used to go to the Methodist church every Sunday, and he went to the Methodist church, not to the Presbyterian church, because that's where the pretty girls were. He had very clear ideas about what he was doing in church on Sunday, but that's not what gave meaning to the ritual. Right? Meaning to the ritual had nothing to do with what David had in mind about the pretty girls. It had to do with external frames of meaning. Anyway, clear? So far, if there are questions, interrupt me. Such ritual acts, I maintain, are crucial to the existence of relational selves. How? Rituals create a subjunctive space. I know what subjunctive is in Hebrew. It's a grammatical term, right? It's the could be, right? Subjunctive. Could be, right? Could have been. Had I studied in Israel, I would today be a famous professor in Tel Aviv University, right? This is a unique human capability. Other animals cannot construct subjunctives. Rituals create subjunctive spaces. Spaces of the could be, of the what if. When we say that of a culture that its members share a symbol system or a set of values or a common idea of the sacred, we are in essence asserting that they share the potential space of a shared could be. For a community of faith shares a sense of a could be, right? If they rounded up all the Jews in Poland or Japanese in California or Muslims in Banja Luka, it could happen to you even if you're a Jew in Toronto, a Japanese in Paris, or a Muslim in Islamabad. All right? So a shared sense of community is, the notion of a shared sense of faith is this notion of a shared could be, or a shared once there was. The moral community that Emil Durkheim outlined in his Elementary Forms of Religious Life exists precisely because it shares the potential space of culture. Much ritual action, in fact, provides this shared sense of empathy, sometimes explicitly in terms of a shared what if, right? And when Jews congregate around the Passover Seder table and are explicitly enjoined to fulfill the commandment to feel as if you yourself have been liberated from Egypt, they create that shared space where a communality of the could-be becomes the very basis of ongoing collective experience. The Shia reenactment of the defeat of Imam Hussein at Karbala, the Catholic participation in the Eucharist, all have a similar import. Confucius, and I think some of our Chinese scholars will correct me maybe, but Confucius, famously uninterested in the world of spirits, still insisted that when he, quote, offered sacrifice to his ancestors, he felt as if his ancestral spirits were actively present. When he offered sacrifices to other spiritual beings, he felt as if they were present. Rambam, Maimonides enjoins us to intend to our prayers as if we are standing before the Creator of the universe. Ritual, therefore, is inherently meaning-producing, but it is not a meaning that can be analyzed, as we moderns so often like to do. It is not a meaning that can be analyzed as a coherent system of beliefs about something else. Indeed, since the practice of ritual creates its own illusionary world, ritual must be understood as inherently non-discursive. Semantic content is far secondary to subjunctive creation. This is, of course, not to say that ritual has no words. It most certainly does. From invocatory language in religious ceremonies to the use of please and thank you in contemporary etiquette. All right? I think, I know it's like in Israel today, but when I lived here, we said tavisigari. We didn't say b'vakasha. So I don't know if this has changed. I have a sense that some things have changed, but it's a totally different interaction. The shalakabel sigari to tavisigari. It's like the nature of our relation is totally different. We've created a relation, right, by addressing one another, and how that plays out, well, it's a very different relation. But my point here, though, is that ritual is non-discursive in the sense that it cannot be analyzed as a coherent system of beliefs. The meaning of ritual is the meaning produced through the ritual action itself. That is one reason that so many rituals include non-discursive media like music or masks, or even language that may be used in ways that defy discursive interpretation. If anybody was in synagogue during the prayers of Morit Tal, they'll know what I was talking about. And so on. In ritual, we subject ourselves to externally given categories of order, whose source can be anything from a transcendent deity, as in Judaism, to the natural ordering of the physical social world, as in Confucianism. Ritual concentrates on the performative nature of the act rather than on its denotative meaning. In fact, pure ritual puts questions of belief and truth aside in favor of the shared world that its action creates and requires. The very external performative aspect of ritual, especially its repetition and recollection of places and times not given to purely rational or instrumental computation, gives it its unique lability. Thus does ritual encompass the ambiguity of life in a unique manner. It allows one to play with such ambiguity in a manner precluded by an undue concern with the authenticity of one's actions and beliefs. Ritual, in essence, unshackles the mind from a need to believe Ritual unshackles the mind from a need to believe in the dogma of our choosing as long as we act properly. Ritual, through the creation of a subjunctive space, is a critical device that allows us to live with ambiguity and the lack of full understanding. In slightly different terms, it allows us to live with the other, with what and who we do not fully understand or know, if indeed we can ever fully understand or know an other. The presentation of rituals as if universe, the subjunctive, requires neither a prior act of understanding nor a clearing away of conceptual ambiguity. Performance simply and elegantly sidetracks the problem of understanding to allow for the existence of order without requiring a full understanding of it. To allow for the existence of order without needing to fully understand or comprehend it. In this way, if we step back and think for a minute, it's very similar to all matters of decisions we must make to take any concrete action when we accept that we have as much understanding as we're likely to get, even though this is terribly incomplete, as it always must be, right? Before action is taken. So this is true of a medical intervention, a financial investment, a marriage commitment, a declaration of war, or even the planning of a highway, in virtually all forms of human endeavor. Through its emphasis on action, on the performative, and its creation of a subjunctive universe, ritual creates a world, temporary, fragile to be sure, but not false. But not false. Temporary doesn't mean false. A world where differences can be accommodated, tolerance enacted, if not fully understood, and openness to the other maintained. I remember being in Cyprus once, and there was a man who was leaving the church, and so he was facing the altar, and as he was leaving, he was crossing himself, and he was walking backwards, right, because he didn't want to turn his back to the altar. He's crossing. At some point, he had to turn around, or he'd break his neck on the stairs, right? Couldn't walk down the stairs backwards. So that turning it around to enter the street didn't make this false, didn't make his crossing himself in front of the altar as his back. It didn't make it false. It just ended it. It ended that temporary reality. It didn't question it. While ritual activity carries its own form of intentionality, it is important to note that ritual is not necessarily concerned with what I want to call sincerity. In any ritual, as I would say in please and thank you, performing the act marks the acceptance of the convention. Doesn't matter how you feel about the convention, if you identify with it or not. In doing the ritual, the whole issue of our internal states is often irrelevant. What you are is what you are in the doing, which is, of course, an external act. This is very, very different from modernist concerns with sincerity and authenticity. Getting it right is not, as in the sincere case, a matter of making outer acts conform to inner beliefs. I claim that outer acts can never conform totally to inner beliefs or inner states. Cannot. Getting it right in ritual is doing it iterated, doing it again and again and again and again and again. It's an act of world construction. It's an act of world construction. As an ideal type, the self who does ritual is very different from the self who is sincere. I think, you know, in Augustine's conflict with the Donatists, it's about the status of priests who abjured their religion during the persecution. Augustine understood this very much. World construction did not, if world construction stood on the inner state of one's belief, you wouldn't have a world church. So over against the ritual model, I wish now to enter into characterization of the sincere model of action and understanding. Sincerity often grows out of a reaction against ritual. It criticizes ritual's acceptance of social convention as mere acting, perhaps mere acting, without intent. It criticizes performance without belief. The alternatives, sincerity suggests, are categories that grow out of individual soul searching rather than the acceptance of social conventions. I'm building a dichotomy here, right? First I talked about ritual, now I'm talking about an alternative, very modern, but not only modern version. Sincerity thus grows out of abstract and generalized categories generated within individual consciousness. The sincere model of behavior seeks to replace the mere convention of ritual with a genuine and thoughtful state of internal conviction. I don't know how many people are familiar with current debates about prayer in Jewish synagogues, in America anyway, but Jews do have this prayer called the Amidah, the 18 benedictions. That's 2,000 years old. It's actually 19, we don't have to go into all of that. And most congregations, almost maybe all non-Orthodox congregations in America, I don't know anything about here, have changed the text, right, which starts with blessings for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, right? So what is that? What is that? This is a need to infuse in the prayer modern political categories of gender equality. It's a need for me, if I'm accepting such a change, I personally don't, but it's a need for me to feel myself expressed in my prayer. And if my political views are that of gender equality, then, you know, by God, I'm going to change these prayers to be able to express myself through the prayers. Some put a tattoo on themselves, some write poetry, some climb mountains, some change prayers in order to express themselves. So that's what I mean about individual categories having to be expressed in the sincere mode, right? Then, you know, they have other problems, right? Like in, you know, in the morning prayers when you say Shalom Sadi Goy, right? So what do you do with that? How do you thank God for not making me a non-Jew, right? That's a reactionary, particularistic, horrific, you know, so they get rid of it and they change it. But again, it's because I have to be able in the prayers to express myself and my own feelings. And this is a big thing. This is no minor matter, but that was just an example. So within the sincere mode, rather than becoming what we do in action for ritual, we do according to what we have become through self-examination. I'm a feminist, I'm a universalist, I'm whatever it is, and so I have to express it in my daily prayers. This form of thought, this sincere form of thought, emphasizes the tropes of authenticity, and hence, by the way, each individual, of course, takes on an immense responsibility. A life of pure ritual or pure sincerity would, of course, be absurd. Both modes of thought coexist in all of us, though not without tension. From the point of view of sincerity, ritual is mere hypocrisy and convention. Viewed from ritual, however, sincerity can threaten the very existence of society by refusing its conventions. Though the tension between the two usually remains under control, it can also lead to shifts in the balance between ritual and sincerity, as nearly any of the world's religious traditions have shown. The Buddhist critique of Hinduism, Christian critique of Judaism, Wang Yangming's critique of Neo-Confucianism, and so on. As these examples always also imply, reform movements based on sincerity tend to be tamed over time with new creations of ritual, as the history of the Catholic Church, of course, shows. Just as highly ritualized historical moments tend to be challenged by sincerity, as in the Reformation, or for that matter, in Hasidut. Right? Or for that matter, in Hasidut. Extreme forms of sincerity discourage all ritual-like behavior, discourage all subjunctives, just as ritualized religious practice, not just ritualized religious practice, but music, adult play, dance, even humor. Think of Puritan England. These theoretical considerations that I've laid out, and I hope they're clear, lead us to explore the idea that ritual and sincerity offer alternative modes of framing social thought, action, interaction, and selfhood. Furthermore, the balance between them and differentiation of realms that each addresses in society have critical consequences for the ways that individuals experience the world, and hence significantly for civic order. Lionel Trilling begins his famous study of sincerity and authenticity by quoting some of the best-known testaments to the sincere mode of thought. He includes Polonius's speech to Laertes, right, in Hamlet, "This above all to thine own self be true," and Matthew Arnold's dictum on the central stream of what we feel indeed, as opposed to what we merely say we feel. He goes on to quote Schiller on the harmonious unity of each man's human ideal, and discusses the central role of Puritan plain sermons on the developing idea of sincerity in our tradition. Indeed, the Calvinist influence goes well beyond its sermon form. For the widespread practice of diary keeping and spiritual soul searching, the search to find the workings of grace in one's soul was a central aspect of Puritan religiosity. It presupposes a self that could be fully grasped, a whole and complete inner state that could be judged for what it was, saved or damned, regenerate or unregenerate. The spiritual writings of Puritan divines take us on a trip inward, on a search for the self that, given the very length of these works, which are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, puts paid the notion that such a search for the sincere inner man can ever easily be completed. Lacking any external reference, any anchors of the outside world and the world outside the self, the search inward for sincerity is truly never-ending. It is sincerity all the way down, as it were, which means, ironically, the never-ending search all the way down for the sincere. Civilizations or movements with a diminished concern for ritual have an overwhelming concern with sincerity, which we can see in forms as varied as those Puritan sermons, the Buddhist concern with uncovering the Buddha nature hidden within each of us. In some sense, then, sincerity works as the social equivalent, perhaps, of the subjunctive, to which I referred earlier. If there is no ritual, there is no shared convention which indexes a possible shared world. I'll repeat that. If there's no ritual, there's no shared convention that indexes a shared world. Instead, if there's no index of what's shared, instead, social relationships have only to rely on a never-ending production of new signs of sincerity, which you can see in American politics all the time. Right? Why do people love Trump? He's authentic. He tells the truth. He's honest. He might be a son of a bitch, but he's authentic. He might be a misogynist, but he's authentic. He might be an Islamophobe, but he's authentic. This is all about the importance of that truth. We have seen how the subjunctive mode constituted a shared reality, a world that allowed the projection of a shared future through the stories of a common past, Kabbalah, whatever. A community of fate shares a past and is thus destined to share a future as well. Fate straddles both past and future. Without such a subjunctive space, without a common origin and a pre-given and authoritative reality, authoritative precisely because it is assented to collectively, right? Individuals must project alternative sets of bonds to connect with one another. If we are not bound by a shared subjunctive, we can only be bound by the depths of our sincerity. Think of teenagers in love. Right? The endless telephone calls. Is it really love? But is it really love? But you said that to him 2 months ago. So, is it the same? Sincerity of feeling comes to replace the subjunctive world of shared illusion as the new ground of personal commitment and interpersonal bonding. The establishment of a stable and unquestionable as-is, rather than a common as-if, becomes the projected base for the intersubjective world. Unlike ritual, the sincere is characterized by a search for motives and for purity of motives, reminiscent of Immanuel Kant's privileging of the purity of the moral will. Sincerity, of course, privileges intention over action. This concern with intent has become the touchstone of much of our own contemporary moral reasoning. Again, for instance, Kant's writings on the workings of the good will. Right? Kant stressed the good will, I'm quoting, the good will is not good because of what it affects or accomplishes, or because of its adequacy to achieve some proposed end. It is good only because of its willing, because it is good of itself. So the philosophers Thomas Nagel and Bernard Williams cogently delineated the limits of this view, clarifying, and I quote them, however Jew-like the goodwill may be in its own right, there is a morally significant difference between rescuing somebody from a burning building and dropping them from the 12th story while trying to rescue them. Right? Kant would not accept that difference. In both cases, the will is good. And indeed, from the Puritans of the 17th century to the talk shows of the 21st, a concern with the inner wellsprings of action and sincerity has become almost an icon of modernist culture. The need to establish society and morality on the basis of sincerity runs, however, into a deep problem. For how can we express true sincerity except by filtering it through the social conventions of language? How are we to know if people's professions of sincerity are genuine, or just acts of hypocrisy, representations of their true self, or just what they would say as if they were sincere? He's actually just trying to sleep with that. Worse still, even our own private thoughts can work only through language, and thus can never fully reveal our innermost sincerity or lack of it. We can accumulate great quantities of discourse, but never dispel the suspicion, even within our own minds, that it is all just artifice. This is why the Puritans produced such an enormous quantity of written self-examination. It's just as evident in our teenage children's endless concern with establishing the truth of their feelings, their own and that of their peers, those of us who have teenage. The Calvinists, am I really saved? And the teenagers, am I really in love? Are at heart similar types of questions. After 3 decades of marriage, kids, laundry, mortgages, funerals, fights, and in-laws, the relationship tends to be sustained by a shared as if, rather than by a continued as is. Or not. Relationships that fail to construct a shared subjunctive over the long term tend to fall apart. It is not enough to love each other sincerely if people fail to act as if they love each other. And acting as if they love each other includes ritualized forms of expressing concern, verbally and in concrete deeds of helpfulness. Anti-ritualist attitudes deny the value of this subjunctive of play, convention, and illusion. They seek to root interaction in some attestation to the sincerity of the interlocutors. Yet, if our love for each other is registered only in what we say, then we are caught in the perennial chasm between the words of love and the love itself. The words are but signifiers, arbitrary conventions, and by necessity at one remove from the event or state that they're meant to signify. Hence, the attempt to express love in words is endless, as it can never finally prove its own sincerity. We can, in the end, distinguish 2 forms, perhaps, of the words, I love you. The emotionally wrought confession by the star-struck young man appeals to the sincere, and pardon that I give example of men, I mean, it just comes naturally. It was a joke. Of course, like all language, like all the language of sincerities, we have doubts. As I said, perhaps he's trying just to get her to bed. Or perhaps he is indeed sincere, and having established that this as if, as his love, he'll never feel the need to say those words again, even through decades of marriage. He may also fail to say those words ever again because he is not sincerely experiencing the same kind of love as when he fell first in love. Kierkegaard wrote about that. Kierkegaard has a little book on repetition, which is exactly on this problem. In Kierkegaard's book, he actually famously claimed, and I quote, "The only repetition is the impossibility of repetition." The book is devoted to no small extent to the problem of love and studies a young man's retreat from marriage in fear that each day of married life will simply remind him of its distance from his perfect memories of past happiness. Better, he believes, to live in love's recollection, repeating as it were what never was, rather than face a present continuous that can never repeat the past's perfection. Here, perhaps, is the real significance of the epigram that Kierkegaard puts on the frontispiece of the book, which is, "On wild trees the flowers are fragrant, on cultivated trees the fruits." On wild trees the flowers are fragrant, on cultivated trees the fruits. Cultivation, and hence civilization, society, life with other men and women in the world as it really is, relies on repetition, on plowing and seeding and weeding and harvesting. None of these are one-time activities. They must be repeated each and every year in its season. Grapevines must be pruned every year. And you know what happens if grapevines aren't pruned, Indeed, right, the original Greek meaning of hubris was unpruned and uncultivated. To maintain a world and to bring forth its fruit, cultivation, that is repetition, is necessary. So too for love. Repetition, including always that absence, that space between repeated movements, right? That's repeated, right? That's repeated, clear? There's nothing repeated there. So to have repetition, I have to have spaces between repetition. Small matter, but important. Think of what makes an ornament an ornament. This is a modernist building, there are not many ornaments. Just think of an ornament. Think about what makes an ornament an ornament. It's a repeated design with a space between them. No space, no repetition. Repetition, including that absence, the space between, in essence, is necessary to any activity that wishes to bear fruit. The grapevine grows and has to be pruned. Grows and pruned, grows and pruned. The inexorably interwoven character of presence and absence, of sign and emptiness, of notion and negation, that is, repetition, is very much lacking in the sincere mode which claims to wholeness, to totality. Sincerity claims to totality, to oneness, to purity. That's what the word means, actually, right? To a purity. Ritual, however, is a mode of knowledge and of life which allows a perpetual crossing of boundaries. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Space absence, space absence. A perpetual crossing of boundaries through the imposition of its meter, its very rhythm. Think of Shabbos, think of holidays, think of the rhythmatic nature of religious, but not just religious rituals. The imposition of its meter onto the world. Ritual's mode of knowing, and hence of being, is not expressed in any claim to arrive at an essence or constitutive condition of the matter at hand, but rather of a continual reenactment of the known as itself a mode of knowledge. It is Aristotelian phronesis, as enacted and embodied knowledge, that despite its absences, continually repeats itself in the world. You could say perhaps its rhythm is its logos. In the continued search to renew the authentic sources of sincerity, there is little room for ambiguity, and of course, these are the spaces of ambiguity, right? These non-ritual spaces are the spaces of ambiguity, of chaos, of lack of order. In the sincere, authentic mood, we're trying to destroy all of that. All ambivalence and ambiguity threatens the attempt to arrive at the true self. The true self can, of course, be very different in different times and different historical periods. But in each case, sincerity tries to resolve all ambiguity to forge a pure and unsullied consciousness. 50 years ago in Russia or in China, more than 50 years ago, it was a search for a true revolutionary consciousness. In the mid-19th century springtimes of the people, it was to be at one with the spirit of one's folk. Exemplified, I don't know, in the epic poetry of Adam Mickiewicz in Poland, or the music of Glinka and Borodin. The particular model of the true self may change, but the dynamic of ascertaining its presence is everywhere similar. This is a dynamic that leaves little room for ambiguity, for mixed motives, and for the complexity and contradictory character of most human striving. I'll tell you a story. So, when my mother died, whatever it was, 14 years ago. So, you know, I was getting up, whatever it was, 5:30 or 4:46 every morning to go to shul to say Kaddish, right? And it was within the 30, it was in the Shloshim, it was within the 30 days. I was talking about my mother to somebody, not a Jewish person, but I don't know if that's significant or not. And I said, I don't know if I used the word, but I was saying my mother was a pain in the ass. She was living with me, I was taking care of her, she was demented, she was depressed, it was rough, it was really the last year. And the person was in shock. The person was absolutely in shock that a few weeks after my mother's death, I could say, that she wasn't, a saint. And, my mother wasn't a saint. And what? So, but then I thought, well, I'm getting up at 5:30 every morning to get to shul to say Kaddish. I can be totally honest with myself, first of all. I don't care about the other. Totally honest with myself about the ambiguous nature of my feelings for my mother. And I think that it's absolutely clear that the more we have a love for somebody, the more our feelings are also ambiguous, right? People we don't really care about, there's very little ambiguity. But the more we have really strong feelings, and I don't think there's anybody here in this room without ambiguous feelings about their mother. I just don't believe it. But what I'm saying, the ritual allowed me actually to be honest with myself. Because I had a form. I had a socially accepted convention through which to express, to enact, to perform my deeply held feelings of grief and mourning. So I could deal with them. I didn't have to deny them. I didn't have to pretend that my mother was a perfect mother or that I was a perfect son. Not only were neither true, but neither can be true for any of us. The drive to be at one with oneself, with the world, Platonius' model of the true self, in fact, plays false with the realities of existence. A measure of hypocrisy complements any notion of the true self because we can never fully express our inner being, which is, at any rate, as I just explained, never unambiguous. And because any social interaction is mediated by language and other conventions. I just broke a convention by telling you a personal story about me and my mother. Right? I just broke that convention and made a move into the sincere. But I'm going to share something real about me. It is real. Okay, but we had this whole thing about the academic self in the beginning, the dean, right? Shakespeare apparently shared some of my assessment, as we can see from the character of Polonius himself, right? Suetonius is the one who says, "To thine own self be true." Those of you who ever read the play know that he's above all a meddlesome fool, not above lying and spying on his betters, full of bombast, self-importance, and deceit. In other words, Suetonius was a model hypocrite, except for his great capacity in self-deception. In many cases, in life as in literature, if not always in social theory, an almost childlike fascination with authenticity, with uncovering the real motives for action, the uncorrupted fount of feelings, or the pure state of experience, gives way over time. It evolves into a much more somber and realistic vision of just how complicated, contradictory, and ambiguous the sources of action, feeling, and intent really are. Single-minded adherence to the sincere mode of existence in the world does not, however, allow for this realization. Rather, it results in a continual production of a hypocritical consciousness that holds up as a model what is essentially a deeply compromised and narcissistic, unrealizable ideal, which is what the woman expected me to talk about myself and my mother, right? It adheres to a vision of wholeness that is not of this world, and which attempts to implement within the world, which attempts to implement this vision within the world, have led to some of the greatest collective tragedies of the past century. A bit of which was discussed in the readings that were passed out, right? People had access to. The sincere self rejects the fundamental brokenness of the world in search for a wholeness and a totality. And while ritual may teach us to accept, even to play with the inherent ambiguity of the world, sincerity attempts by its very definition to exclude ambiguity. Recall that its dictionary meanings include being without admixture, free, pure, whole, complete. Samuel Johnson lists among its cognates of sincerity, unhurt, uninjured, pure, unmingled, uncorrupt. Sounds like Robespierre. Sincerity carried, that was actually a serious comment. Sincerity carried to its extreme is the very search for wholeness, for overcoming the boundaries and for positing a unitary, differentiated, and uncorrupted reality. It is the utopian impulse itself, as dangerous in self as in politics. Ritual and sincerity, I'm claiming, are two possible responses to the world, to responses to what is unknown, to what is not of the self. They are, moreover, responses that have significant implications on the organization of the social world. As modes of responding to the world outside of the self, they are as well modes of responding to the experience of the sacred, which by its very definition represents that which is set apart and forbidden, the totally other. What we usually call the modern period, defined by secular consciousness, therefore should be understood, in part anyway, as a period in which sincerity claims have been given a rare institutional and cultural emphasis. As a consequence, ritual has come to be seen from the perspective of sincerity claims and has come to be relegated in our minds to some supposedly traditional order that the modern period has heroically superseded. Indeed, so pervasive have these sincerity claims become that even revolts against the so-called modern era are done in the name of finding ever more authentic forms of sincerity, which is how I would characterize various types of fundamentalist movements, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and so on. Yet what I would like to argue is that taking rituals seriously helps teach us the tremendous dangers of trying to build a totally coherent world of authentic individual truth claims. It helps teach us instead to recognize the fragmented and discontinuous nature of the world as it is. The endless work entailed in building and refining our multiple and often conflicting relationships within that world, and the ultimately tragic fate of that work. And it helps to teach us the powers of ethical action based upon such a tragic vision. To accept that the world is fragmented and discontinuous also means that the work of building and refining relationships is a process that never ends. Ritual, at least in its relationship to the rest of experience, is never totally coherent and never complete. Ritual is work, endless work, but it is among the most important work that we humans do. Thank you very much.
So I prepared a few words, first maybe generally and historically about the presentation that Professor Seligman gave us, and then also some examples, some examples for this dichotomy between sincerity and ritual. And I hope you understand what we just heard here, because I want to point that out. I think that in this book and in others, but mainly this book is the basis for the lecture that you just heard. Professor Adam and his co-writers define for us, I think pioneerically, a fundamental dualistic pair or dualistic duo that we as humans are constantly engaged with. So this is a fundamental point of tension in each and every one of our psyches. Like the tension between freedom and security, like the tension we may have between nature and technology. Pairs of opposites or complementaries that we have to deal with the binary distinction between them. And our life runs a course between these binaries. So such is the binary of sincerity and ritual that Adam has just presented to us. This is why I think it is very important, Adam's work and what he said. Now, clearly, this is also something that Adam has said near the end of his presentation. We have to understand also that we live in a society, in a culture that is fundamentally tilted or it's fundamentally biased, thank you, for the sincere pole of this binary couple. In current Western modern culture, we much rather be sincere, be authentic, than obey rituals. You've noticed that. We even put down rituals. We think that rituals and ritualistic activity is mechanic, dry, lifeless, and such words we use to describe. So, and Adam also mentioned Trump as a good example, and it's a great example. Notice not only how popular Trump is and how people praise his authenticity, his spontaneity, etc. Notice also that the same people will cheer and hail how he destroys politically correct culture, or politically correct manners. Now, what is politically correctness if not some sort of ritual? We maybe want to say something, but we force ourselves to say things in a certain way, using certain words, right? Indigenous American and not Indian, etc., right?
Verbal ritual.
Yeah, it's sort of a verbal ritual, which basically is all of manners. And you can even hear from the word manners that it is the way we act, right? And Trump destroys this. And this is why he is our hero. Because as a culture, we are at a point where we almost despise rituals. Rituals threaten our view of ourselves as authentic, original, individual, one of a kind. We are all individual snowflakes, of course, yes? And ritual, as Adam just said, constructs society, constructs community, makes us part of a group. Now, obviously, also, this is, we can't, I mean, to think that we are really individual in any disconnected way, that we are islands in the stream, not connected to anything else, is of course an illusion. And Adam pointedly showed how with the example of love, there is no end to the search for the authentic, real love. It's always question after question after question, or inquiry, self-inquiry after self-inquiry. Now, what happened that we are today in such a place? Of course, the Western tradition is built upon what we like to call the Judeo-Christian tradition, but basically we are living in a Christian Protestant world. This is a Protestant culture. And we can locate the beginning of the turn towards the blatant preference of sincerity over ritual with Protestantism, with the Reformation, even with Martin Luther. When Martin Luther, in the Diet of Worms, says, "Here I stand, I can do no other," he is putting forward his own authority and his loyalty to his authentic belief in front of tradition, in front of ritual. And by the way, he actually didn't say, "Here I stand, I can do no other." He said, I will quote, yeah, I mean, the Diet of Worms, the Pope, and has his men there, and Luther is requested to recant, to take back his challenge of the church, and to make tshuva, okay, and maybe things will return to order. But Luther says, unless I am convinced by the testimony of the scriptures or by clear reason, for I do not trust either the Pope or in councils alone, since it is well known that they have often erred and contradicted themselves. So unless I am bound by the scriptures I have quoted, and my conscience is captive to the word of God. I cannot and will not recant anything, since it is neither safe nor right to go against conscience. May God help me, amen. Now, of course, Luther still has scriptures as a very important source of authority for him, and tradition, and the Word of God. His conscience is bound to the Word of God. He is not a secular person, of course. But the shift begins here towards the individual, and towards the individual's loyalty, holding fast to his own conscience, which he cannot deny. Now again, in a culture of ritual, nobody asks you what your conscience is, and you're quite well or quite invited to let go of your conscience and do whatever the ritual demands of you anyway. You get up in the morning, יהודי מתגבר כערי, and you pray shacharit, whether you like it or not, whether you feel good about it or not, whether it is good for you or not, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how you feel. So Luther here is the first step, I would say, to the modern world, to the world we live in. And we can jump 100 years forward to George Fox. Fox, another Protestant reformator, he would be the the founder of what's called the Friends of Christ, the Society of Friends, which are the Quakers, we call them the Quakers. And George Fox says about his discovery, about his conversion to what he later formed as the Quakers, that he had no one to turn to. And all the God's men and the church people and even traditions would tell him nothing that is real. And he finally understood what he had to do. He had to listen to the word of Christ alone, the living God alone. And he says, and I knew that experientially. This is a quote. And I knew that experientially. So how did he know that? Not by turning outward towards tradition or ritual, but by turning inwards. Something in him lit up. And it's maybe not surprising that the Quakers, that the Society of Friends, pray without words, without ritual. How do they pray? They sit in a circle, in silence, until the first one of them feels that the Holy Spirit has descended on him or her, and then he gets up, or her, or she gets up, and she talks about what the Holy Spirit charged her with talking. So you can see this is this is the most unrealistic ritual that you can have. And if the Holy Spirit does not descend on anybody, nobody gets up, that's it. So I want now to bring a few examples to show how this plays out, how this fundamental binary between sincerity or sincerity and ritual plays out in Judaism. And the first example I will bring really is from a month ago. I had some sort of public correspondence with Rogel Alfer. He's a writer in Haaretz newspaper. And Alfer wrote this in an article. He wrote about the October HaShachor, Black October, all filled with holidays, rituals. He wants nothing to do with them, and they're forced upon him simply by him being alive in Israel. So he says, I didn't wish anybody Gmar Chatima Tova, have a good final, be written for the good, let's say. Because there's no God, and God doesn't write anybody in the book of living or the book of the dead. When people told me that blessing, I didn't answer. Anyway, nobody that is really close to me wished me that, and I prefer honesty or integrity to false manners. I didn't go to synagogue because I pay close attention, or serious attention to words. I take words seriously. So I couldn't, in all honesty or in all seriousness, sing the prayers. And really, I couldn't ask for a better manifestation of what we're talking about here than this little clause. Yeah? The very tension between sincerity and ritual. Alfer wants to be serious and sincere. He wants to be authentic. He doesn't want to tell lies. So we can't tell anybody Gmar Chatima Tova. know, be written for the good or whatever. Because it's not true, because there's no God, God doesn't write. And Alpha, of course, expresses a very common attitude or sentiment today in Israeli society and in Western society in general. This is the, would be the secular, even atheist attitude that says, I am true not only to myself, but to the actual, real state of events, or reality. Believing in God would be a sort of forgery, a sort of,
falsehood.
Yeah, it would be to lie to myself. Maybe people lie to themselves in order to cheer up a little bit, in order to have some comfort in hard days, and this is why they invent God. But I am true to myself and to reality. I am brave enough to face bleak reality. This is the mindset. Yeah? And okay, I won't go through my correspondence with Alpha. In the article that answered this, I said that rituals are a part of all our lives. And even Alpha, of course, has his share of rituals, because saying, how are you, ma shlomcha, when you meet a person is a sort of a ritual. And of course you don't mean for that person really to start explaining how he is. It doesn't really interest you. And when the dean or when Aviad presented the speakers here or this series, of course this is also a sort of ritual, yeah, that we do in beginnings of lectures and series. Okay, but I want now to again to focus a little bit about this point of stress, this point of tension between ritual and sincerity inside Judaism, and now inside religious Judaism. I want to bring a quote or two from people who are religious, observant, as we say in the Jewish world, but they are also spiritual seekers, and they want what they would call a real experience of God. And a real experience for God for them is not simply observing the halakha. And this is what is interesting. Look at this. Wow, I won't this. Come on. Seriously? Okay, I'll translate.
Translate positive.
Okay, I'll translate. But I want to read it in Hebrew.
Paraphrase.
Okay, I'll read it in Hebrew and in paraphrase. This is a quote from a religious Zionist Jew that has gone to Uman in the Ukraine, where he prayed with a lot of other Jews over the grave of big Hasidic tzaddik, Rabbi Nachman in Breslev. And of course Hasidism, as Adam also said, is a manifestation in Judaism of this call for authenticity, feelings, expressiveness, etc. So he says, הייתה איזושהי תפילה בציון, וזה היה אחד האירועים המכוננים. מפגש עם כזו חיוניות ושמחה שאף פעם לא ראיתי, שבאמת נתנה מבחינתי איזה מזור לחסך לא מודע. לתפילה כזאת, מלאה בשמחה, בהתלהבות, בקרבה לקדוש ברוך הוא. התפילה מאוד מוחשית שהקדוש ברוך הוא נמצא איתנו, כאן, עכשיו, ואנחנו מתפללים אליו. אני לא יודע אם זה נשמע טריוויאלי, אבל מבחינתי זה היה חידוש לא יאומן. ושאף פעם לא הייתי מודע שזה יכול להיות ככה, ושאף פעם לא שמתי לב לחסך. החידוש היה קרבה לקדוש ברוך הוא, חיוניות, אני חי, אני עכשיו מדבר עם השם, אני שמח בתפילה שלי, וזה דברים שלא ממש חוויתי קודם בשום קריאה. ואני ממש הבוגר הקלאסי של הציונות הדתית הלאומית, למדתי בגבעת שמואל, אחרי זה ביתיר, כל אחד מהמקומות האלה בגלל של יתיר, אני חייב תודה, אבל שום דבר ממה שחוויתי באותן דקות ראשונות לא התקרב בכלל לאיזשהו אופן של תפילה שחוויתי לאורך כל השנים האלו, חד משמעית. I'll say a bit in English. This person prays, and for the first time in years, he has been praying for years. He has obviously prayed thousands of prayers, of daily prayers. And for the first time, he says, I felt something. I felt close to God. I felt living. I felt a living prayer. And for him, this is the real prayer. A real prayer is a prayer where you feel something. Not when you obey the minute intricacies of the halakha as best you can. Because according to halakha, according to Jewish law, how do you pray? Do this and this, say this and this, go a little forward, go a little backward, whatever, yes? That's it. Then, what we call in Hebrew, yatzata yedei chova. You are clear, like God made a little V mark beside your name for that daily prayer. So if you ask Chazal, if you ask the wise man that really created halakha, what is a good prayer? A good prayer would be a prayer where you do it diligently and accurately. But this person living in modern Western world, this isn't enough for him. Something is lacking. And this again, this is what I want to have us see. This tension that is today not only prevalent in Western world, because really for most of us the tension is unseen. I mean, most Westerners today clearly prefer honesty to ritual or sincerity to ritual, and for them there's no tension because they don't need ritual. Either they're secular or Christians who go once in a blue moon to church, doesn't matter for them. But for this person, his whole life is filled with rituals. But still, rituals are not enough for him. He doesn't feel connected to God with the covenant made up of 613 mitzvahs. That's not enough for him. He wants something else, an inner feeling. Now, of course, this is observed and known with rabbis and halachic figures, and it's a source of concern for them. Of course, they see. I mean, since Hasidism, really, this tension has been around in Judaism. I want to bring, I want to bring the response to this. The response to this is to lay complete stress on the other side of the equation. This is Yeshayahu Leibovitch, a known figure in Israel, a very respected intellectual who died in 95 or 96. And Leibovitch says, yes, I will read in Hebrew and then translate. Af avodat Elohim atzma, should be Af avodat Elohim atzma, ממני. נעשית מתוך תודעת האדם שבזה הוא עובד את אלוהים, אלא מתוך דחף פנימי שלו לעבוד את אלוהים, הרי כן עבודת אלילים, אף על פי שהכוונה היא לשם שמיים. האמונה המתבטאת במצוות המעשיות בעבודת אלוהים אינה עניין שנועד לתת ביטוי ופורקן לרגשי האדם. עבודת השם היא האמונה שמתבטאת במעשים שהאדם עושה מתוך ידיעת חובתו לעשות אותם, ולא מתוך דחף עצמי. גם שהוא מכוון לעבודת אלוהים, אבל מבטא סיפוק שהאדם נותן לעצמו על ידי העבודה הזאת. Leibovitch says, if a person prays out of an internal urge to pray, this is idolatry. It's not only that it's not good, it's the opposite of worshiping God. If a person prays, and he has a good feeling from it, and he does it enthusiastically, this is idolatry. Worship of God is only praying because you are obeying a commandment to pray. It doesn't matter if you want to pray or you don't want to pray. You get up and you obey. This is God's work, says Leibovitch. And this is, of course, this is a complete other pole or edge, not the right word,
extreme
of this binary dichotomy. And of course, now I don't think lots of Jews, if any, can live the way Leibovitch lived, if he did live the way he talked. But it shows us how acute, how serious this tension is in Orthodox Jewish circles today. This is a great matter of concern. And I think, yeah. And one final example is I'm bringing from the new movement of enthusiasm around the Temple Mount. You will probably know, in the last few years, many more Jews than ever before, religious Jews, go up to the Temple Mount and they try to pray there, and they didn't get arrested because Jews are not allowed to pray there, etc., etc., etc. It's a whole thing. And here is a person, here are two quotes, like Rabbi Israel, Harav Israel Ariel, he is one of the leaders of this group, but he's the old generation. Today he's out of popularity, and he says, יש מצווה לעלות להר בכל עת ובכל שעה. מי שעולה להר מקיים מצוות עושה מן התורה. There's a commandment to go up the mountain every day or any hour, and whoever goes up the mountain obeys a positive commandment of God. This is classic Jewish thought. But now look at איתי אליצור. He says, עולים לשם בשביל הקדושה, בשביל הקרבה לשכינה. העלייה להר נמצאת במתח בין שני דברים, בין הרצון להתחבר לקדושה, ובין החובה לשמור על הקדושה. אם ניכנס במקום שלטמאי מתים אסור להיכנס אליו, חיללנו, יצא שכרנו ולא הפסדנו. I'll briefly translate. He says, we go there for the holiness, for the sanctity, for being close to the Holy Spirit, the Shekhinah. Going up the mountain is in tension between two things, wanting to connect to the holiness, and our commandment to guard the holiness. If we go into a place where we shouldn't go, it's a matter of purity and defilement, we shouldn't defile the temple. What we see here is really two different definitions of sacredness or holiness that Itai Elitzur, I think, does not notice that he is combining. One is the old-fashioned, classic Durkheimian definition of holiness, which a sacred object is an object that is isolated and that we take distance from. And there are certain obligations about it that we shouldn't cross. Right? Like the Sabbath is holy because we don't do a lot of stuff in it. Hanukkah candles are holy. We cannot do anything but observe them. They are not for light. Right? This is the concept. Another form of holiness here is a holiness that we connect to. A feeling. להתחבר לשכינה. Connecting to the Holy Spirit. This is a whole different sort of holiness. A holiness that is much more popular in Christianity. Like the Quakers that we just talked about. And Itai Elitzur here is in between these two definitions of holiness. He wants to connect to the Shekhinah, but he knows that halakha forbids him to walk in certain places, and that's also a sort of holiness. Okay, so just to recap, this tension, which I personally researched in my work on Jewish meditation, is quite an issue today in the Jewish world, and I think the way Judaism will deal with it will reflect maybe not only on Judaism, because it is such an important issue in the Western world today. Thank you.